John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 34. And just a little catch up on what's been going on. In the last couple issues, John has been on some like one-off missions. So 2 issues ago, he was fighting a dog that was possessed by a man's soul and that was eating people, which is always fun. And then in the last issue, we were following John on a nice Sunday where John was trying to have a new outlook on life. He was trying to be nice and look on the bright side of things. He even went out to brunch with an old acquaintance and almost got wrangled into some kind of weird corporate hippie timeshare or something like that. That is until John got weird food poisoning and went on a weird trip through some kind of backwards world where all the writing was backwards. And at first he was all confused and scared, but eventually he realized there is no spoon, basically. And he was able to kind of will the ability to talk there and hear what people were saying in normal speech. And then he proceeded to go to a bar and drink. So that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first with this issue number 34, we got the cover here. There's a very disturbing man staring out at us, and he has no shirt on, and he's got a 1,000-yard stare, much like Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. And his right arm is reaching into like a tattoo heart on his chest. And then there's some writing on his torso that says, "It's inside me. I keep trying to kill it, but it just won't die." And we also see that this one is written by Jamie Delano with art by Sean Phillips. And on the first page, we see an old face that we haven't seen for a long time. All the way back in the Fear Machine story arc, there was a girl named Mercury who was kind of a psychic, and she was kidnapped by this clandestine organization to help run this thing called the Fear Machine that was supposed to cause civil unrest and give the people in power more control over society. So after John and Mercury's sister Marge ended up defeating the big bad from that arc, we haven't seen Mercury or her sister Marge in over a year. And at the end of that arc, John got separated from them by like a big tidal wave coming and washing him away. And he never went back to check. He just kind of assumed they'd be better off without him. So on this first page, we're kind of getting reacquainted with Mercury. We're getting her inner thoughts. Her and her sister are travelers, so they have been on the move, traveling around in their van. But this night, Mercury is not able to sleep. She is up, staring around. She says it's pretty hot for this time of year, but there's some kind of terrible pressure throbbing at the back of her neck. Her narration says, "There's an awful childish certainty of something stumbling through the space towards her, sleepless and uneasy in its heart of gold. She waits for it to strike. There's sickness here, contagion, something unhealthy that threatens the system. They've stayed too long. They should have moved on yesterday." So having this ominous feeling that something's going to happen or someone's going to come, and also like just it being hot and stuff, she can't sleep. So Mercury gets up out of her bed, and Mercury's bed is in the loft kind of above where the driver's seat is of this van. And then her sister Marge sleeps in the back. And she goes over to her mother, Marge. And you know what? I just realized that I've been calling Marge her sister. Marge is her mother, but I think I instinctively think that it's her sister because that's how they kind of act towards each other. And Mercury's kind of older and wiser than she should be for her age because she's like a teenager. And Marge is in her 30s and seems a little maybe immature for her age. So like I was saying, she goes over to her mother Marge and kind of like pulls her blankets up more so she won't be cold. And Mercury's narration says, "For Mercury, it comes naturally. She was born to this life. But it's different for her mother Marge. Marge gets so tired these days and lonely. Eventually Mercury knows she'll have to leave her behind. But not yet. Not till she's strong." And that's what I was kind of saying with their relationship. It seems that Mercury is looking after her mother Marge and talking about how Marge isn't strong enough to be on her own yet. So Mercury decides to go for a little midnight walk. So she opens the door of her van and goes outside, and her narration says, "It's nearer now. But what? Something dark and scared. Something dangerous. Something confused that keeps blundering up against her mind, touching her with a clammy, trembling hand like a monster playing blind man's bluff. They should have moved on. Too late now." So having this feeling, Mercury, gets freaked out a bit. And the art in this scene is very interesting because it seems like she feels this feeling and then she like immediately rushes back to the steps of her van as she goes in. And I'm saying van, but it definitely is more of a camper. So as Mercury's rushing into the doorway and up the steps, she gets another flash of this bad thing coming, and the narration says, "There again, much closer now, a nervous tick inside her head, a whimper, a giggle, a mad boy tugging at his mother's skirt." And like I said, in these panels, she looks like she's running for her life, like she's terrified in a horror movie or something. And once she gets inside that camper, she slams the door and locks it and then wakes up her mother. And right as she does that, someone begins banging on the door. And Marge immediately thinks that it is the police because in the past we've seen police harass them and other traveler friends of theirs. But Mercury says, "No, not them, it's something." And then both of the women grab a weapon of some kind. I believe Marge has a knife and Mercury has a rolling pin. And the banging continues and Marge yells, "Go away, we're in bed." But then a familiar voice says, "Marge, open up, it's me." And Marge's face changes from worry to happiness as she recognizes that it is John Constantine at the door. But Mercury's tone doesn't change. She actually tells her mom to not open the door, but Marge can't help herself. She opens it and we see a very slovenly John Constantine who is apparently drunk and on a bender. And Marge says, "But Mercury, it's all right. It's just John." And then John says, "Course it's me. Who are you expecting?" And we see the name of this issue is called The Bogeyman. And immediately Marge runs out and gives John a big hug. She is very happy to see John. But it's a different story for Mercury. As Marge gives John a big hug, John actually begins to throw up, I think, or just has like a coughing fit in general. And Mercury says, "Put him down, Marge. You don't know where he's been." And then John walks over to Mercury and he says, "Hello, my lovely. How about a big, nice welcome kiss for your old pal, John?" And Mercury is absolutely disgusted at this. And she says, "No, I don't think so." And she comments that he smells really bad. And I'm not sure if she's talking about like his aura or something, or like his psychic energy. Because he definitely looks like he smells bad physically, but she is reacting in a way that seems more than just a smell that's bad. So Marge kind of chastises Mercury for being so mean to John. She says that like we've helped out people who are on benders and wasted before. So, John's our friend. We should definitely help him out. And Marge says, "He's obviously in trouble and we're his friends." And Mercury kind of grabs her shoulders and tells Marge, "Oh, Marge, can't you feel it? He's poisoned himself." And then she goes over to John, who's slumped down to the ground and is leaning against their camper. And she grabs the lapels of his jacket and she says, "What was it, John? What did you do? Don't hide it from me. Something about fathers and a gun. You bastard, let me see." And John just looks down at the ground and says, "No, I'm sorry, I can't." And Mercury stands up and just looks at him with contempt and says, "Coward." And then John stands up and begins to throw up again. And Marge is kind of confused. She's just like, "John, Mercury?" And Mercury, once again looking at John with contempt, is like, "Let him go, Marge." And Marge says, "Please, Mercury, don't do this. You know how I feel about him." And once again, Mercury's kind of being like the mom and grabs her shoulders and says, "He's dangerous, Marge. There's something black and furious eating at him. You're too vulnerable. He's not good for you." And then Marge, acting definitely like a kid here, kind of suggests that the reason why Mercury is trying to push Marge away from John is because Mercury wants John all to herself. And so she says, "But is he for you, huh? You little cow. You're just jealous because someone comes to me for comfort instead of coming to the all-seeing, all-wise Saint Bloody Mercury. Don't you understand, child? I just need someone to be close to. And Mercury fires back, to screw you mean? Marge, he doesn't want to be close to anyone. He doesn't want comfort. He just wants someone to hurt. And Marge replies, listen, Mercury, I'm not a little girl. I've been around the block once or twice. This is still my home as well, and I'll do what I like with who I like in it. And to this, Mercury grabs a set of her blankets and then says to Marge, okay, mother, but don't ask me to watch, as she leaves, presumably to go sleep outside. And the whole time they've been arguing, they've been yelling this stuff. So John, who's been throwing up and then just standing outside smoking, is hearing all of this. And he's not arguing or trying to say anything back. He's just staring because it seems like he knows Mercury's right about him. So the second that Mercury leaves, John goes into the camper and Marge offers to make him some tea. And Marge says, I'm sorry, John. I don't know why she's so cranky. I know she likes you. She talks about you all the time. And John says, she's right. I shouldn't have come. I'm a plague ship, Marge. You should tell me to sling me hook, which I'm assuming is some kind of sailor terminology for going away. But of course, hearing this, Marge just wants to comfort him more. And she goes over to him with his tea and she says, don't be silly. The whiskey's making you feel sorry for yourself. Drink this, then we'll get you clean and cozy. And as she hands it to him, her robe kind of is open and her cleavage is kind of exposed a lot. So as John takes the cup, he's just staring directly at Marge's exposed cleavage. And because of this, Marge gets kind of embarrassed, realizes that she's revealing herself a little too much, and sits down and pulls her robe closed and says, how on earth did you find us? And John goes into a story about how he happened to meet their friend Errol, who was also in the Fear Machine story arc, who is a fellow traveler and was part of the caravan that Marge and Mercury were originally in when they found John at the beginning of that Fear Machine story arc. And if you don't remember, Errol was the mixed race man who has like dreadlocks and has the word 0 tattooed on his forehead. And apparently John ran into him at some kind of protest. It says it's a poll tax protest. And I'm assuming this is a real thing because the art in this section definitely looks like it's referenced from actual photos. And we see that there's some kind of protest going on for this poll tax, and the police are charging at the protesters in riot gear and batons. And apparently John actually got hit in the head or something during that charge because he says, the next time I looked up, the battle had moved on. It's taken me 2 bloody days to find you. I think I've lost it, Marge. Lost it completely. And Marge says, lost what, John? And John responds, you name it. Function, purpose, reason, faith, everything. And Marge says, I don't understand. Do you want to talk? And John says, ha! What's the sodden point? It's too late to talk. It's all over now. Going down in the swamp. Lost me footing. Fell at the last bleeding hurdle. And as John's saying this, he's standing up and then he begins to like sing some kind of weird song. And basically he's just acting super weird and lost. So Marge walks him over to the shower and begins to undress him as she walks him. And then the song that John's singing has a line where he says the word raving instead of roving. And Marge corrects him and says, no, that's not the lyrics. The lyrics are, the gong, I'll go no more a roving. And as John's about to step into the shower, he says, no, Marge, you can't stop. Never stop moving. Never look back. It's death if you do. And then we cut to a scene of a boy playing. And this is supposed to be, I'm assuming, the representation of what John is talking about here and kind of what his life has been so far. And this boy who's playing is running across some like rocks on a beach. And the narration says, perpetual motion. Rock jumping across a timeless beach. Best feeling in the world. Fill endless childhood hours. Never stop moving. That's the trick. Perfect balance. Shift weight from foot to foot, rock to rock. Step sure. Watch out for weed, the black shine of that wet rock. Crunchy grip of barnacles is best. Eyes on the horizon, future ahead. Never look back. Never let memory step on your shadow. And as this boy is playing and jumping on the beach rocks, he begins to slip on one of them. And he falls down, but we don't see him hit the sand. He just kind of falls into a blackness, but he definitely hits the ground. And the narration continues, never slip, you little hopeful traveler. Never stumble. Never tumble down into the dark, wet cracks with crab legs, the sand ticks, and the cold, wet jelly things. Never fall. And then we cut back to the shower where John has apparently slipped and fallen in it. And Marge says, John, get a grip. You'll hurt yourself. And John responds, I fell, Marge. I got old and stiff and cold as hell, and I fell. And he gets on his knees in the water in the shower, and he grabs Marge's robe and he says, "Make me warm, Marge, now." And Marge looks down at him and says, "John, no, I. And then John, seeing that she's reluctant, kind of gets up and puts a towel on him and says, "I understand." And she says, "Don't look at me that way, John. It frightens me." And then John says, "It frightens you? How do you bloody think it makes me feel? It's inside me. I keep trying to kill it, but it just won't die." And then we get a close-up in this panel of his face as he grabs it and kind of like pulls down his cheeks. And so we get like his sunken eyes, and he looks terrified. And he says, "All my life it's been squirming in me, sending me scrambling under stones, shifting through cesspits and moddens, looking for something worse than itself. And each ghastliness it led me to would claim a sacrifice in place of me." And then John falls to his knees in front of Marge, and he continues, "I mortgaged my soul, Marge, in mouthfuls, to keep my twisted monster child quiet and secret in the deepest cellar of my stony heart. Hell is where the heart is, babe. Don't you believe me? Come and have a look." And Marge says, "Stop it. I don't like you this way. It's ugly." And then John gets into a bed and says, "You should have listened to Mercury. She could feel it. She knows what's good for her. She's the future, Marge, and she wants no part of me." And as John says this last thing, he kind of lays on his stomach on a bed, and Marge comes over and kind of rubs his neck and says, "Shh, be quiet now. It'll be all right." And then John turns his head and looks up at her and says, "Oh no, it sodden won't. I looked back and got turned to stone." And then we cut to Mercury, who is still outside, and she's just walking around covered in her blanket. And because she's psychic, she can feel everything coming out of that camper, all the emotion and feelings, which is definitely making Mercury angry. The narration says, "He's infectious. There's so much bitterness and anger in him, it turns Mercury's stomach. How can Marge stand him near her? He's like lightning looking for a tree, a knife seeking a wound, an old man looking for his death. There's something there that she can't look at. He's supposed to be her friend. How could he have done this to himself?" She thought she could trust him to find the way, but John has let her down. Why? Why are they all so scared, so bogged down in the swamp of their own tiny needs, so weak? It makes Mercury lonely. And then Mercury kind of walks to an alleyway and I guess gets some wood and lights a fire and builds like a little fire for herself because she was cold. And the narration in this section lets us know what happened to Marge and Mercury after the Fear Machine story arc. Because like I said, we were just kind of left hanging since we were following John and they all got separated. So it says, Mercury tries to understand how it must feel to be old, to have roots, but it's so obvious to her that everything has to change now. When Zed's dance had brought them all together to shift the balance of the sexes and undermine the Fear Machine, Mercury had thought that they'd got it made. Weakened by the flood, the old oppressive structures had begun to erode, to be swept back into the melting pot piece by piece. But John, Marge, and the other backsliders have got to let go of the old stuff that's dragging them down and fan the flames of hope. Sometimes they seem to be trying, but it's as if they're crippled, with one foot trapped in the grave of the past. Mercury wishes they could have stayed in Scotland with Zed, but Marge couldn't take that yet. The power of their triangle was too intense. It scorched her. They have to find more people to take the strain and give Marge a chance to get her balance right. They can't afford to do it without Marge. They can't afford to do it without anyone. Mercury wants to scream with the frustration of it. Doesn't John understand how important he is? How he could have left it all behind, surfed the wave of change? Instead, he'd skulked along the tide line, poking and pecking at the flotsam and jetsam, just like some scavenging black bird. He'd grubbed out a new hoard of dark treasure to gloat over. He'd woken it up again. He'd deliberately unbrushed the graveyard earth from its undead corpse and brought it here to Marge, to wave it in the face of her compassion. Why do they have to do that? What's the fatal flaw? And then Mercury has some kind of weird flashback to her school days, where she remembers some like nerdy kid that would show the other boys in her class his turds in the school toilet. And then she compares that to the mothers of those children who would gather around this boy's mother, who was a victim of domestic violence, so she was always like beat up and bruised. And then Mercury snaps out of this flashback, and as she stares into the fire that she's made, the narration says, Marge, Marge, don't let him near you. Don't let him sleep with you. He'll poison you. But she will. It's inevitable. Mercury can sense how he repels her, but she knows that By the weird chemistry of response, which she can never fully grasp, Marge will love him. She'll take this grubby, spiteful boy and fold him into her, suffering to wrap his emptiness in hers, futility trying to smother his childish fear with her soft motherhood. It's heartbreaking. It's going to hurt her, but Mercury can't interfere. It's a free world now. And then we cut back to John and Marge inside of the camper, and it seems like John is being pretty manipulative here. It seems that he's just trying to get Marge to pity him so that she'll sleep with him. Marge says, "Don't cry, John, it hurts me. I don't know how to make it better." And John says, "Yes, you do." And she responds, I can't. Not just like that. You're too far away. Talk to me. Tell me something nice." But John's focus is only on one thing tonight, and that thing is he just wants to sleep with Marge. So he says, "Nice? Nice? Don't be bloody stupid. There's nothing nice to tell." And then he goes on like a mini rant about like how terrible the world is and how there's nothing nice in the world going on. He brings up like Romanian babies left to die because of AIDS, because abortion was illegal, and the Kurds being gassed by the Iraqis. He's really laying it on thick here just to like make her feel bad and maybe like pity him, and that will make her want to sleep with him. And he goes on to tell her why he was on like a bender, like what happened in the last week. And apparently he was in Amsterdam. He says he was there to track down a new designer drug called death, and that he thought that might be just what he needed. And in his hunt to find this drug, it led him to like the local sex district where there's like prostitutes in the window, and he was looking at them, and he was just kind of disgusted by the whole scene. And he says, "I was wondering why I'd run away from it, why I couldn't cope. I looked up and saw this punter looking at this girl, a grubby, seedy boogeyman with glinty eyes. I sneered at him, and he sneered back. It was my reflection, a trick of the light, I suppose. I left without the drug. By the time I got back, the wobble was a shockwave running through my life. In the middle of the riot, it all went silent, still and black. And I was falling backwards into hell." And while he was saying this, he kind of slipped back onto the ground and is looking up at Marge and kind of pleading her to get away from him. He says, "Don't try to catch me, Marge. I'll drag you down. Don't trust me. Don't let me taint you." And Marge doesn't really know how to respond. She even offers him some downers to kind of chill him out. But he kind of uses this against her, and he says, "I see, the old chemical kosh, is it? I thought you wanted to know how I felt. I thought you wanted to talk." And she says, "I can't help you with those things. I thought I loved you, John, but I don't know who you are. You seem lost, deep inside yourself. I'd like to be close like we were before, but you keep trying to freak me out, trying to drive me away. I don't get it, John. Why did you come here? What do you want?" And with that, John kind of crawls up to her, and he kind of hugs her and puts his head on her chest, and he says, "I'm sorry, Marge, but just hold me, please. I'm so scared." And in this panel, you can kind of see a look that Marge is giving him, a side eye, kind of revealing that she knows what he's doing, but she doesn't have any other way to comfort him. So she gives in to his manipulations finally. And then we cut back to Mercury outside, and she's kind of putting her hands over her ears and her head because she can feel everything psychically that's going on in that van. And the narration says, Mercury tries to shut them out, to let them wallow in their mess in privacy. But she's too tired and they're too close to be ignored. Her mind riots with their disarray, the corrupt complexity of their passion play, his dark manipulation, and Marge's complicity. A vampire to her silent invitation. He moves to Marge and she accepts him blindly to her oyster love, struggling to wrap the cold abrasion of his dead boy's heart in milky mother of pearl. Trembling with transferred emotion, Mercury gulps twice, once for sadness, once for joy. Hot tears freely course her cheeks as they also course her mother's. And then Mercury begins to spiral in this super messed up psychic swirl of emotion. And she feels something grab at her, and the narration says, too late and too exhausted to resist, Mercury knows that he has snared her too, pulled her mind into the drowning pool of his unconscious. And there's actually like a physical representation of this despair that she's been pulled into by John. And that manifestation is the younger version, the boy version of John himself. And this boy is pulling on her blanket, and the narration says, and now she cannot ignore the silent, angry, mad boy who tugs at her skirts in such desperate entreaty, imploring her with his leaden will to come and snare the guilty horror that haunts his glinting eyes. And then at the bottom of the page, we see the next issue is called Dead Boy's Heart. And that is the end of the issue. So with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, @gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.